Hello all, and welcome to the Walt Disney Family Museum for our Walt's birthday celebration. My name is Chris, and I am the Marketing and Communications Assistant for the museum, as well as a storyteller tour guide. As the theme for this year's festivities is Innovation and Inclusion, I'd like to talk for a bit about the examples throughout Walt Disney's career that exemplified innovation and inclusion. Let's set the scene with Walt Disney arriving in Hollywood and beginning what we know today as the Walt Disney Company. Living in Kansas City after serving in the Red Cross Ambulance Corps at the conclusion of World War I, Walt Disney discovers the world of animated cartoons and creates Laugh-O-Gram Films. After a big contract goes mostly unpaid, Laugh-O-Gram Films declares bankruptcy. Following encouragement from his brother Roy, who was living in Southern California at the time, Walt scrapes up enough money for a one-way train ticket from Kansas City to Hollywood on the California Limited. It's the summer of 1923 when Walt arrives in Hollywood. He has $40 in his pocket, his art supplies, and a few clothes that don't match. After a few months of being turned down by motion picture studios, he decides to give animation one last try. With a copy of his pilot film, Alice's Wonderland, a live-action girl interacting in an animated world, he contacts a successful animation distributor, Margaret J. Winkler. She was a champion of the animation industry and turned fanciful creations into internationally beloved characters. She watches it and sends a telegram to Walt telling him that she would be interested in more examples for a series of films. For the first 6 Alice comedies, Walt does all the animating, writing, and directing by himself, with Roy managing the finances and running the camera. After those first 6 shorts are successful, Walt is able to hire additional people. He invites some of his old Laugh-O-Gram colleagues, including Ub Iwerks, to join him in California. The Alice comedies continue for 3.5 years, totaling 56 shorts. In terms of innovation of this time period, Walt flipped the convention of the time by successfully animating a world around a live-action character, in this case, a child actress. For inclusion, we look at Margaret J. Winkler. As the first female member of the Motion Picture Producers Guild, Margaret Winkler was often mistaken for a man, since she cleverly established herself in the industry as M.J. Winkler, adding the fictitious J to her name to disguise her gender. Acceptance wasn't always forthcoming from her male peers. The Boston Traveler voiced the frequent attitudes Winkler dealt with. Gentlemen, one of the few remaining fields in which you have not had to face feminine competition is being invaded by a woman distributor. Winkler countered, quote, "I think the industry is full of wonderful possibilities for an ambitious woman, and there is no reason why she shouldn't be able to conduct business as well as the men." Winkler managed the production and distribution of Max Fleischer's Out of the Inkwell series, and also put the famous character Felix the Cat on the map. Walt knew of her notoriety with distributing well-known cartoons and conducted research on his distributor before finalizing his agreement with Winkler by writing to Harry Warner, head of Warner Brothers Studios, on her, quote, responsibility and standing. Warner's response to the distributor's work said, quote, "Miss M.J. Winkler was my secretary for a number of years, and since she has done very well, I believe she is responsible for anything she may undertake. In my opinion, the main thing you should consider is the quality of goods you are going to give her. And if that is right, I don't think you need any hesitation in having her handle your merchandise." Margaret Winkler is responsible for giving the Disney Brothers cartoon studio their start, contracting Walt's series, the Alice Comedies. Through the 1920s, Walt continues to innovate in the realm of black and white animation with Oswald the Lucky Rabbit and Mickey Mouse. The runaway popularity of the latter, thanks in part to the introduction of synchronized sound, makes Walt Disney a household name, generating great success both at the box office and with related merchandise sales into the 1930s and beyond. Instead of continuing to produce only Mickey cartoons, Walt creates a new cartoon series called the Silly Symphonies. In this new series, there isn't a single star character like Oswald or Mickey. Instead, the star is music. Walt uses this series to test new innovations, the first of which is color. Walt partners with Technicolor for the exclusive use of their 3-strip process, and he decides to debut it in 1932 with a silly symphony called Flowers and Trees. At the time, Flowers and Trees was well into production as a black and white short, but Walt has his animators restart production in color. Their hard work pays off, as Flowers and Trees would win the studio's its first competitive Academy Award. Three Little Pigs, released in 1933, and The Old Mill, released in 1937, would further usher in key developments in personality animation and technical depth, respectively. Although things are again going very well for Walt, both professionally and personally, this is the time of the Great Depression, and its effects are beginning to be felt at the studios. It's getting harder to sell cartoons because theater owners are finding it difficult to attract audiences. They're starting to pass on cartoons to instead show 2 feature-length films as a way to bring in patrons. Seeing this trend, Walt starts to think about creating a feature-length animated film. For innovation in this time period, we have synchronized sound, color, personality animation, and technical depth in short cartoons. For inclusion, we look at the ink and paint department. The ink and paint department was nearly all women at this time, following the gender-specific division of labor trends of the era. This was one of the few creative positions possible at this time for women. In 1936, Mary Weiser, a supervisor in the color model department, determined that the Walt Disney Studios should create their own paints and experimented to find the best mixtures, making the Disney Studios the first and only animation studio to create its own paints. Following her experiments, Weiser developed the Painter's Bible, a comprehensive guide of best practices for painting. At the time, it was a risky proposition to produce a feature-length animated film because cartoons of this era were expensive to undertake, especially with all of the enhancements from Walt's innovations. To attempt to ensure the risk pays off, Walt decides to make 2 significant investments. The first investment is in his animators. He hires more artists to work at the studios and hires instructors to help the staff hone their skills. However, because of the available space, the atmosphere becomes more crowded. Drawing boards are set up anywhere there's a place for them. Animators are practically working shoulder to shoulder. Ironically, however, the close quarters foster creativity and collaboration, and many of the animators enjoy it. The second investment Walt makes is in the story, since it's the foundation upon which the entire film is built. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is a classic battle between good and evil, with elements of romance and humor. To ensure that all of those elements were well depicted, Walt and his team had been using storyboarding, the practice of putting the story onto boards, to visualize the entire storyline beforehand, which was yet another groundbreaking innovation of the Silly Symphony period. As production gets underway, word gets out about the project. Members of the press anointed it Disney's folly, predicting that no audience would want to see a feature-length cartoon. In December 1937, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs premieres at the Carthay Circle Theater in Los Angeles. Audiences received the film enthusiastically. During its first release, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs grosses a bit more than $8 million. This is during the Great Depression, when an adult movie ticket is $1 or less across the country. Walt accurately views this success as a turning point. The innovation highlight of this period, of course, is the invention of the feature-length animated film, storyboarding, which had been brought in the period prior, and combining the innovations of the prior decade plus. The inclusion highlight of this time period is the elevation of more female artists at the studios. During the successful launch of the Alice comedies, Walt started to grow his team and hire on his first female employees. One of those women was Hazel Sewell, Lillian Disney's sister. Her first job at the Disney Studios was to blacken each film, which was inking in the black and white cell. She became the first woman to establish and run a major division within the animation industry. She was one of the first women to get a screen credit as art director on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. In 1934, Walt had lunch with a former McKinley High School and Chicago Art Institute classmate, Bianca Majoli. She impressed Walt with her artistic talents and story skills, so much so that he hired her as the story department's first female employee. Master Disney animators Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston, in their book Too Funny for Words, credit her with elevating the art of animated storytelling. Quote, "We could not have made any of the feature films without learning this important lesson. Pathos gives comedy the heart and warmth that keeps it from becoming brittle." By the time Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was in production, Majoli wasn't the only woman in the story room. Dorothy Blank and Grace Huntington were hired in the mid to late 1930s. Blank was one of the earliest writers to get Snow White underway and developed the earliest story treatments for the film, extracting key story points and developed character descriptions. She also wrote key dialogue for Snow White and defined script structures. Dorothy Blank helped to define the concept of story research, one that is still fundamental at the Walt Disney Studios today. Walt uses part of the box office take from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs to create a new studio in Burbank. He partners with famed architect Kem Weber to create a state-of-the-art facility. Everything from the size of the windows to allow maximum sunlight in, to the shape of the desks, one of which we have on display, is carefully considered and designed. Fantasia, released in 1940, Pinocchio, released in 1940, Dumbo, released in 1941, and Bambi, released in 1942, are all produced during this time and incorporate Walt's continued drive for innovation. The multiplane camera, used first in the 1937 Silly Symphony, The Old Mill, is here on display. This incredible device, which creates the illusion of depth and dimensionality, used up to 6 different levels. As the camera on top starts filming, each level could be moved up, down, left, or right. The end result is the effect of moving past some elements of scenery, while others remain in the background. This is one of only 3 multiplanes that exist worldwide. The others are located at the Walt Disney Studios in Burbank and at Walt Disney Studios Park at Disneyland Paris Resort. For Fantasia, Walt wanted a way to surround his audience with music. To achieve that goal, his team creates an early stereo system of speakers that are installed all around a theater, which was called Fantasound. But despite these innovations and the wonderful stories, Pinocchio, Fantasia, and Bambi all turn out to be initial box office disappointments, primarily because the international box office is severely impacted by World War II. A bright spot in this tough period comes in the form of Dumbo. It's only 64 minutes long, but it's the first movie since Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs to be a box office success. The innovation highlights of this period include Fantasound as a forerunner of stereo surround sound in movie theaters, the character model department, and greater sophistication and stylization of feature animation. The inclusion highlights of this period include the fact that Fantasia provided a visual symphony experience accessible to families and moviegoers who otherwise may not have had the opportunity or ability to go to the opera. In later years, conductor Leopold Stokowski remarked that, quote, "I often received letters from people to say thank you for doing it," as in Fantasia, "because I was always afraid to go to a concert hall. When I went to Fantasia, I heard the great master's music and realized I enjoyed it." Bambi featured the work of Disney legends Retta Scott, the studio's first credited female animator, and Tyrus Wong, a Chinese-American artist who was chiefly responsible for the look and feel of the film. As that was going on, the US government is becoming increasingly concerned about World War II. To ensure that ties with Central and South America are strong, Washington asks Hollywood to make films with Latin American themes. Walt agrees to this, and he goes on a Goodwill tour of Central and South America with a hand-picked group of artists to do research. One of those artists is named Mary Blair. This trip has a profound influence on her art. Soon after, she becomes one of the most important concept artists at the studios. Work on gathering material for films began almost instantly. Quote, "I set up a shop," Walt recalled. "Never went near the embassy, didn't go around the usual haunts of the Goodwill people. I went right in." While performing research, it didn't take long for the team to discover just how large a part of local culture the Brazilian parrot was. Several of the artists began focusing on studying the bird by way of local zoos and museums. Creating a character based on the papagaio was an obvious yet wise decision. Jose Carioca would become Donald Duck's co-star in their first feature based on the trip. The Goodwill Tour group's work would ultimately lead to 2 films in this way. Saludos Amigos, released generally in 1943, and The Three Caballeros, released in 1945. After the war's end, Walt continues to diversify and innovate from the mid-1940s into the early 1950s, as reflected in this gallery. There are a number of stories that were left on the drawing board during World War II that were too long for a traditional animated short and too short for a feature-length film. Some are combined into what are termed package features. They include Make Mine Music, Fun and Fancy Free, Melody Time, and The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. The package features, although creative and innovative in style, aren't box office successes. Walt next blends animation with live action during the 1940s with films such as So Dear to My Heart, released in 1949. Also during this chapter, the Disney studios had money that was earned overseas but needed to be spent in those countries, like England, to help them recover from the war. Walt decides to put a film crew together and go to England to produce films there with the, quote, frozen funds. In doing so, he diversifies further into live-action filmmaking. The first of these films produced in England is Treasure Island, released in 1950, followed by The Story of Robin Hood and His Merry Men in 1952, The Sword and the Rose in 1953, and Rob Roy, The Highland Rogue, also in 1953. Walt would continue making live-action feature films back at the Burbank studio with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, released in 1954. The studios also continued to produce traditional animated features back home. Cinderella, released in 1950, Alice in Wonderland in 1951, Peter Pan in 1953, and Lady and the Tramp in 1955 all make their debuts around this time. Gallery 8 reflects the studio's connection to the natural world. When Bambi was in production, Walt hired a photographer to capture the essence of life in a forest. After seeing the photos and footage, Walt realized that there are stories to be told about nature. With the world reopening for travel around the globe after the war, Walt's interest in nature and the environment leads to Seal Island, released in 1949, as the start of this new film series called The True Life Adventures. However, Walt has a tough time convincing theater owners to show Seal Island. He manages to persuade one theater in Pasadena to show it for a week in late December 1948, which happens to be the minimum qualifying requirement to be nominated for an Academy Award. Despite its short run, Seal Island is nominated for an Academy Award, which it wins. The True Life Adventure series would go on to win a total of 8 Academy Awards. Walt Disney's People and Places documentary film series was made up of 17 travelogues released from 1953 to 1960, primarily focusing on little-known places or out-of-the-ordinary people. Some of the places viewers explored were in Siam, Switzerland, Sardinia, Samoa, Morocco, and Japan. The innovation highlight of this time period, Walt's films of this time continue to maximize animation's potential, whether being used in the entirety of a film, used only for special effects, or somewhere in between. Walt also innovates in creating documentary short films and features that appeal to general audiences, much in the same way that Fantasia opened the world of classical music and symphony orchestras to the public. For the inclusion highlight of this time period, the result of the South America Goodwill trip were the films Saludos Amigos and The Three Caballeros, which represented the diverse cultures and customs in South American countries. Walt's People and Places travelogue series would do the same for other countries around the world. In the Deluxe Golden Book, Walt Disney's People and Places, Walt writes, "In our film visits to faraway lands, we have found that every people has a wealth of ancient lore. Every place a treasure of rich tradition. Each land is steeped in the memory of historic times that shaped the lives of its people. Our People and Places pictures are living records of some of the unique customs and old cultures that still endure in remote and isolated corners of the globe. Most of the world's people will never travel to strange and faraway lands, but we hope that through our contribution may be made towards strengthening the bonds of goodwill and understanding by which all men can exist together in peace. Walt likes to take his daughters to places like Griffith Park on the weekends. He'd sit on a bench like this one, eating peanuts, and watch his daughters ride the merry-go-round. During those outings, he thinks about how there should be a place where parents and children can have fun together. This idea dovetails with another idea he had during his time in Kansas City. He once told a friend that he wanted to have his own amusement park. It is at this time that Walt creates a new organization, WED Enterprises, which has as its responsibility the planning of what would become Walt's theme park. The people who work there, many of them employees hired away from the studios, are known as Imagineers, a term that blends imagination and engineers. They start out making plans for a small plot of land Walt owns across the street from the studios alongside Riverside Drive, where present-day Walt Disney Animation Studios is. Concept art for the original park idea is in the gallery above the train cars. But Walt continues to come up with additional concepts, which eventually outgrow the original space. Walt then contracts with the Stanford Research Institute, known as SRI, to find a new location. After reviewing information like population trends and freeway planning, SRI suggests establishing the park in the then small town of Anaheim. During this time, Walt and Roy use the concepts that the Imagineers are creating to seek funding for the park. They pitch not only to banks, but also to television. Although movie moguls see television as a threat at this time, Walt sees television as an opportunity to directly engage with the public. He and Roy end up partnering with ABC, with ABC giving them $500,000 and loan guarantees in exchange for an ownership stake in the park and a weekly television show. The show not only allows Walt to bring his brand of entertainment to a television audience regularly, but it also gives him an opportunity to excite the public about the new park to be built in Anaheim. Walt decides that the show, like the park, will be called Disneyland. It's an immediate hit, and planning for the park continues. Disneyland takes less than 1 year to build. A few days before it opens, Walt and Lillian celebrate their 30th anniversary at the Golden Horseshoe. On July 17, 1955, Disneyland opens its gates to what was supposed to be a preview by invitation. However, throngs of people couldn't wait for the public opening the next day. Tickets are allegedly counterfeited, crowds swell, and attractions break down. But after the day ends, Walt and his employees address what went wrong, and they find ways to fix it. The crowds return, and Disneyland becomes an unprecedented success. The model of Disneyland in this gallery is not how the park looked like on opening day, or at any time afterward, but rather what Disneyland might have looked like in Walt's imagination. Everything depicted here is something Walt saw, created, or saw concepts about. It's also a reminder of Walt's belief that as long as there is imagination left in the world, Disneyland will never be complete. The innovation highlights of this time period were expansion into television, the creation of Disneyland, a first-of-its-kind theme park marketed to the whole family, and attraction technology progressing at Disneyland through its first 5 years, with the opening of the Matterhorn bobsleds, first tubular steel roller coaster in the world, the Disneyland all-wag monorail system, the Western Hemisphere's first daily operating monorail, and the submarine voyage, which Walt liked to claim was the largest peacetime fleet in the world. For inclusion, television allowed for Disney programming and Walt's ideas for his park to be beamed into the living rooms of families all across America on a weekly basis, regardless of their geographic proximity to the park and studios. Disneyland Park is created as a place where parents and children can have fun together. Moving into the 1960s, every department at the studios comes together to create Mary Poppins, released in 1964. It's a dazzling film, one in which a device called Optical Printer Number 2, on display in this gallery, is needed to create the fantastic special effects. It's an enormous success, and Julie Andrews would go on to win the Academy Award for Best Actress for her portrayal of Mary. Also during this time, Walt is asked to build 4 pavilions for the New York World's Fair. The first is Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, sponsored by the state of Illinois, featuring a 3-dimensional, life-sized figure of the former president. To bring it to life, the Imagineers use a new technology called audio animatronics. The second pavilion is Ford's Magic Skyway, in which guests travel in Ford cars through a natural history diorama. Some of the dinosaurs from this pavilion would find new homes at Disneyland after the fair as part of the Primeval World diorama. The third pavilion is the General Electric's Progress Land, featuring the Carousel of Progress, a rotating theater show that celebrates how the quality of life had improved between different periods of American history. The fourth pavilion is created for Pepsi-Cola and UNICEF, a boat ride saluting the children of the world called It's a Small World. All of these pavilions are successful, which encourages Walt to create something permanent for the East Coast. Our innovation highlights of this period include new attraction technologies, such as that used for audio animatronics figures, camera technologies achieving special effects in Darby O'Gill and the Little People, starring the late Sean Connery in 1959, The Parent Trap, released in 1961, and Mary Poppins, released in 1964. Our inclusion highlight for this time period, It's a Small World, which gave us Walt's inclusive view of the world, celebrating the similarities and differences of the children and cultures of the world. He asked the songwriting duo, Richard and Robert Sherman, to create a brand new song for the attraction, one that would appeal to people from all over the world. Quote, Walt's words to us were, "I want it so it can be translated into many languages," explained Richard Sherman. Behind the smiling audio animatronics figures and the attraction's seemingly simple theme song lies an unwavering central focus on tolerance, empathy, and kindness. Written a short time after the Cuban Missile Crisis, the lyrics describe a world of hope and a world of fears, before urging listeners to remember that there's so much that we share. Richard Sherman described, quote, a simple child's prayer to respect each other and to love each other. That's what we're saying without saying those words. Walt focuses on Central Florida for the next project. A vast amount of land is purchased, and the project is given working titles such as Project X and Florida Project, then publicly announced as Disney World. Walt plans to build a theme park there, but his main focus is building a futuristic city, one that would introduce and test new ideas. He calls this city the Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow, or EPCOT. This gallery includes an artist's depiction of what EPCOT looked like. In the center is the downtown section. Surrounding downtown is high-density housing. Beyond that housing is the Greenbelt, where parks and other public recreational areas are located. Then, Spanning like the petals of a flower are the different neighborhoods or suburbs. Linking all of these areas together is public transportation, similar to those used in Disneyland, the People Mover, and the monorail. But as these plans are coming together, Walt's health starts to become an issue. At 9:35 a.m. on December 15, 1966, Walt passes away. His death shocks his family and it stuns the world. Roy gives Disney World its new name, Walt Disney World, to forever dedicate the project to his beloved late brother's vision. The innovation highlights of this time period are incorporating new Disneyland and World's Fair technologies into urban design and improved modes of transportation, which were then folded in when the decision was made to proceed with Walt Disney World Resort. The inclusion highlight of this time period is Epcot. Epcot was the pinnacle of Walt putting the skills of his artists and Imagineers toward creating solutions for the problems of our world. He said of his new community, quote, "Epcot will always be a showcase to the world for the ingenuity and imagination of American free enterprise. I don't believe there's a challenge anywhere in the world that's more important to people everywhere than finding solutions to the problems of our cities. But where do we begin? How do we start answering this great challenge? Well, we're convinced we must start with the public need, and the need is for starting from scratch on virgin land and building a special kind of new community. And most of all, when Epcot has become a reality and we find the need for technologies that don't even exist today, it's our hope that Epcot will stimulate American industry to develop new solutions that will meet the needs of people expressed right here in this experimental community." Throughout his lifetime, Walt Disney always sought new technology and techniques to increase the quality of his entertainment. He also knew of the value of people, the richness of stories from all over the world, the talents of underrepresented groups both at home and abroad, and what could be accomplished for the good of the world if we came together. In this, the story of Walt Disney's life and career is the story of innovation and inclusion. Thank you for spending some of your day with me, and happy birthday, Walt.